In June of 1940, Nazi soldiers poured into France. The French army had been decimated in the battles of May, and the morale of the French was destroyed along with it. The roads and railroads leading south from Paris were choked with millions of refugees. L'exode, the Exodus.
They fled, tearing in fright along the roads with their belongings on their backs or in bikes or in baby carriages, and their children atop them. Soon the roads were clogged. Troops were also trying to use them. Soon the Germans came over, bombing the roads. Soon there were dead and dying, and no food, no water, no shelter, no care. William L. Shirer, Berlin Diary.
Among these desperate refugees were the young actress Madeleine LeBeau and her husband, both Parisian Jews, who knew exactly how well they could expect to be treated by the Nazis. The journey was horrific, sleeping on the ground sodden by June rains, passing body after body, some dead of starvation and exhaustion, some shredded by bullets from the German planes which flew along the highways of France, machine gunning the helpless refugees. And perhaps the greatest misery of them all for Madeleine, knowing that the France she loved, the France of liberty and democracy, was falling under the heel of the Nazi jackboot. They reached Bordeaux in the southwest of France, where the government had fled after abandoning Paris. 300,000 refugees packed the streets of the city, desperately trying to get on a ship out of France, or to obtain a visa that would allow them to go south by train or foot to get into Spain. Here too the refugees were followed by the dark wings of the Luftwaffe, and bombs fell in the crowded streets, killing them by the hundreds. Many of the refugees, Madeleine and her husband among them, flooded towards the Portuguese consulate, where the consul, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, was giving out visas to everyone who came. His nephew César described the scene he encountered upon arriving in Bordeaux that June.
When I arrived in Bordeaux and approached the consulate of Portugal, I noticed immediately that a large crowd of refugees was heading that way. The closer I got to the consulate, the larger the crowd. The dining room, the drawing room, and the consul's offices were at the disposal of the refugees. Scores of them of both sexes, all ages, including old and sick people. They slept on chairs, on the floor, on the rugs. The situation was out of control. Even the consul's offices were crowded with refugees who were dead tired because they had waited for days and nights on the street, on the stairways, and finally in the offices. They did not eat or drink for fear of losing their places in the line. They looked distraught. They had not washed or changed their clothes or shaved. Most of them had nothing but the clothes they were wearing. In the consulate, they worked all day long and part of the night. My uncle became ill and exhausted. He had considered the pros and cons and made the decision to help everyone without distinction of nationality, race, or religion, and to bear all the consequences. César de Sousa Mendes.
Madeleine and her husband stood and slept in the line, got their visas, and went as quickly as they could to the border crossing into Spain at the resort town of Hendaye. They made it through, though shortly after they did, the Portuguese ambassador to Spain discovered what Sousa Mendes had been doing and asked the Spanish not to honor any visas issued in Bordeaux. More than 10,000 refugees, mostly Jews, were stranded at the border because of this. Many of them would not survive the war. Madeleine and her husband made it into Portugal to Lisbon, where they obtained visas to enter Chile in South America. They took the SS Cuanza to New York City, and then to Veracruz, Mexico. But when they arrived in Veracruz, they discovered their Chilean documents were forgeries, and they were refused entry. The ship was ordered to return to Europe, to the despair of the remaining passengers, most of whom were Jewish refugees. When the Quantha returned to Lisbon, Madeleine and her husband would be deported back to France into the hands of the Gestapo. But on the way back to Europe, the Quantha stopped in Norfolk, Virginia to refuel. There it was met by a gang of lawyers, including Jacob J.L. Morowitz, who began suing the pants off of the shipping company and the crew, anything to keep the ship in port while they worked their connections in Washington, D.C. Eventually, Eleanor Roosevelt caught wind of the matter and advocated with her husband, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to allow the refugees to stay. Madeleine and her husband were among the first off of the ship. Both being well-known film actors in France, they decided Hollywood would be the best place for them to try and rebuild the life that had been destroyed in Europe. Madeleine landed a few minor roles in 1941, enough to get signed on for a contract with Warner Brothers, who put her in a few different films in 1942, including one you may have heard of. In Casablanca, Madeleine played Yvonne, who was supposed to have a much bigger role as Rick's jilted lover, but her part got cut down in rewrites and reshoots, which Madeleine was disappointed by. But even in her much reduced screen time, she still managed to be at the center of the most moving shot in the entire film. If you've seen the film, you know the scene. Victor Laszlo, Resistance hero, rouses the patrons of Rick's to sing La Marseillaise, the anthem of France. On the line, Mugir se féroce cela, it cuts to Madeleine. She's not acting here. Those tears flowing down her face are genuine. In her mind must be the images of her desperate escape, the dead bodies littering the roads, the France she loves under the boot of Nazism. At this moment, when the outcome of the war was still very much in doubt, she sings La Marseillaise as a prayer for the freedom of France. Vive la France, vive la démocratie, she cries out. Long live France, long live democracy. I can hardly think of these two moments in this perfect scene without my eyes misting over, and every time I actually watch it, I cry. Because right here on her face is love. Love for France and all that country represented to her. Love for democracy, for liberté, égalité et fraternité. Liberty, equality, and brotherhood. A revolutionary kind of love. The same year Casablanca was being filmed, Aristide de Sousa Mendes was dependent on a Jewish soup kitchen in Lisbon for food. He'd been recalled to Lisbon for defying the orders of the government and put on trial. He was expelled from the diplomatic corps and blacklisted by the Portuguese government from any employment. With 15 children to feed, he and his family lived in terrible poverty. He would be poor for the rest of his life, reduced to begging for financial help from the people he'd helped save from the clutches of the Nazis in 1940. They sent him some money, but only just enough. He died in 1954 without a single escudo to his name. Even though his actions had ended his career and resulted in his impoverishment, he still stood by them. He wrote to his lawyer in 1941 that, "In truth, I disobeyed, but my disobedience does not dishonor me. I chose to defy an order that to me represented the persecution of true castaways who sought with all their strength to be saved from Hitler's wrath. Above the order for me was God's law, and that's the one I have always sought to adhere to without hesitation. The true lesson of Christianity is to love one's neighbor." Sousa Mendes summoned up the most encompassing, uncompromising kind of love, a love that could make him risk everything, lose everything, to save the castaways facing Hitler's wrath. If there is a heaven, then surely this man has found an exalted place in it, and if not, his memory will still forever be a blessing. He did not ask the desperate people who stood in line and slumped on his stairs if they were good or bad, if they had ever been criminals, if they carried narcotics. He saw desperate people and he knew he had the power to help them, so he did. It was an act of revolutionary love. Yet many of those he saved were turned away by the US, by Mexico, and would have been turned away by the US again if not for the intervention of Jacob Morowitz and Eleanor Roosevelt. And that intervention came at a cost. Assistant Secretary of State Breckinridge Long, who was in charge of refugee admissions, was very upset about Morowitz and his associates going over his head to the First Lady.
With the support of Secretary of State Cordell Hull, Long recommended a drastic overhaul, relocating the process to his own area of the State Department. Articulating the matter as one of national security, Long was persuasive in catching Roosevelt's attention so close to Election Day, and in doing so drastically restricted the flow of refugees into the United States. By the middle of 1941, in the months just before the United States entered the war, Long was able to reconfigure the mechanisms for screening those fleeing Europe. He was almost completely successful in halting the flow of all refugees for most of the war. Holocaust historians Richard Brightman and Alan Lichman conclude, if Long lost the Quantha battle, he quietly won the war on refugees.
Fear and hatred of foreigners was nothing new in the 1940s, and obviously is nothing new today. FDR's government, bowing to domestic political pressures, blocked Jews from fleeing Europe, condemning who knows how many people to the gas chambers. Our current administration gleefully boasts of sending back refugees to violent and unstable homelands, of ripping people out of what little safety they've found and throwing them away like human trash. This reactionary hate has become normal, even celebrated, on the right wing of American politics. At the memorial rally for conservative activist Charlie Kirk, the President of the United States felt it appropriate to say this.
The best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent. And I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that...
And he was cheered wildly by 90,000 people who claimed to share the same faith as Sousa Mendes did. Reactionary hatred of progressives, queer people, trans people, intellectuals, women, and immigrants has become the basis for a great deal of the decision-making of the modern Republican Party. Reactionary hate and reckless greed are the motive forces of modern right-wing politics. But reactionary hate isn't a purely right-wing phenomenon. There's plenty of it on the left, too. It differs in its origins. I would say, broadly speaking, that the reactionary hate on the right tends to come from fear. I'm afraid the scary immigrants are going to do unspeakable things to my good Christian neighborhood and my white body. On the left, however, it tends to come from empathy for others. In women's spaces, one often hears things like, men are trash, or I hate all men. And though these statements are often hyperbolic, they sometimes have a real ring of truth to them. There can be real hatred for cisgender people in trans spaces, especially online trans spaces, and it comes both from fear for themselves and from empathy for other trans people being treated like shit by cisgender folks. Reactionary hatred of humanity as a whole is also somewhat common, across the political spectrum. Whether it's climate despair or racism driving it, there are people of every political creed who will say, unironically, I hate people. It reminds me of a bartender I once knew who, after another patron shared a story about someone being an asshole, said, we need somebody like Hitler. He had the right idea, but the wrong people. We need someone like Hitler to thin the herd. Yikes. That was almost certainly hyperbole, but there was a kernel of sincerity to it. She heard a story about a bad person, and she wanted that person to die. Our society is full of this kind of content. There's a great Lindsay Ellis video on Nebula about body cam compilations that really gets at the heart of this impulse, this reactionary desire to see suffering inflicted on those we despise. But reactionary hate is what has brought the world to its current state. Anger has a purpose, it brings us the energy to defeat that which threatens us, but it is ultimately a reactive and destructive force. Hate can only destroy. It takes love to restore, to renew, and to create. To defeat reactionary hate, you need revolutionary love. The media we consume shapes us, especially in the modern era. The media we consume is arguably as influential as the people with whom we associate. Parents know this, hence why conservative parents try to keep their kids away from media that normalizes queer people, and why liberal parents try to keep their kids away from media that promotes stereotypes of different races or religions. This is why propaganda as a technique is so widely utilized by various societies. It creates us versus them narratives and tells us who is the us and who is the them. It gives us heroes to identify with and villains to oppose. Casablanca functions as a work of propaganda. It wasn't made by the US Army Signal Corps or at the direction of the government, but it was made during the Second World War by an American studio. And the hero is a reluctant American drawn by his conscience into the world anti-fascist struggle. Now, when I call Casablanca propaganda, that may raise some hackles, but propaganda does not have to mean bad or even false. Propaganda is an artistic work intended to propagate an ideology, in this case, anti-fascism. Casablanca serves a propagandistic function by trying to sway Americans who may be aloof from the war into more active support of the effort, and Americans needed the encouragement. Draft dodging was actually more prevalent during the Second World War than the Vietnam War, partially because so many more men were being called up. And only 3 years before we entered the war, almost 30,000 people in New York City attended a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden. Casablanca and other pro-interventionist films were a necessary tool to motivate the American people to go fight for freedom, to build weapons and ships and planes, to destroy Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and all their grubby little fascist puppets. In the modern era, the greatest threat to our world is still reactionary hate, in the forms of neo-fascism and identitarianism, of ultranationalism and religious extremism, all mobilized by the ultra-wealthy to safeguard their dragon hordes. Reactionary hatred is their shield against the threat which a politically unified populace poses to their vast wealth. So to combat hate, we need revolutionary love. And to promote revolutionary love among the people, we need media that can serve both as entertainment and propaganda. Now, I adore Casablanca, but it is a cultural product of its time and place. We all exist in the context of our modern world.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
Yes,
And for many people, especially young people, Casablanca will not be as emotionally accessible as it may be for me. Everyone should still watch it. It's a great movie. But its efficacy as anti-fascist propaganda fades if you don't have a real emotive sense of what's happening here. So we need modern media that promotes revolutionary love, especially to young people. And luckily enough, I can think of 2 recent animated shows that do a damn good job of showcasing the power of revolutionary love to defeat reactionary hate. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power and The Owl House are similarly shaped shows. Each is about a femme who escapes a conformist society, gains tremendous power, and with the help of a gang of misfit friends destroys a force of reactionary hate which seeks to destroy the very world that the main character has come to love. Each show centers on 2 kinds of love, queer love and ecological love. Each kind of love is a revolutionary love we need more of in this world. And while I don't think that these 2 cartoons lay out a comprehensive strategy on how to implement a revolution based on love, they can help nurture that spirit in those who already possess it and help foster it in those who do not. In The Owl House, our protagonist, Luz Noceda, is a weirdo. She has a big imagination that gets her into trouble at her school, and her mother, concerned for her well-being, wants to send her to a reality check summer camp, where she'll learn to think inside the box. Her mother's not a bad person by any means. She just wants her daughter to be able to do well in a society that doesn't have much room for weirdos like Luz. If you grew up queer, this might all sound familiar. In a society which is queerphobic, loving parents might see conversion therapy as the best option for their child, changing who they are so they have a better chance of thriving. Neurodiverse kids also face this kind of treatment, therapy that goes beyond helping them manage the negative side effects of their neurodivergence and into the realm of trying to force conformity. ADHD and autistic folks are expected to mask in order not to be labeled as weirdos. Now, I'll be looking at both of these shows through the lens of their efficacy as works of propaganda, and through that lens, the first episode of The Owl House is the best first episode of a show I can think of. It's fun but still has emotional weight, simple but not stupid, and firmly establishes the revolutionary thesis of the whole show. No one should be punished for who they are.
Because us weirdos have to stick together. And nobody should be punished for who they are.
The Owl House really has two kinds of queer love story. One is romantic, but the other is familial. Queer people are often forced to make their own chosen families, as the bonds of blood fail in the face of the queerphobia that is so pervasive in most modern societies. Even those of us who have accepting family usually seek out other queer people to form deep bonds with. Us weirdos have to stick together, Luce says, and she's right. The queer family that Luce, Ida the Owl Lady, and King build is revolutionary because it's a family of choice. People who've elected to love one another and support one another despite having no blood relations. This kind of social organization is radically egalitarian when compared to the traditional family unit, because it's free of the expectations of obedience and deference that come along with the traditional parent-child relationship. Queer family, intentional family, is one built on the free association of equals, unconditional love that one chooses to give. Consider this quote from the English political theorist Sir Robert Filmer, writing in the 17th century.
Neither common nor statute laws are or can be any diminution of that general power which kings have over their people by right of fatherhood.
The book in which this quote is written, unsubtly called Patriarcha, is an argument for the divine right of kings grounded in the absolute power fathers were believed to possess over their children. This idea is still alarmingly common today.
If you allow your hormone-addled 15-year-old daughter to slam the door of her bedroom and give you the finger, you're going to get more of it. There has to be a point at which Dad comes home. Dad comes home, and he's pissed. Dad is pissed. And when Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not going to hurt me more than it hurts you.
And the patriarchal family is, in many respects, the origin of most oppressive systems. Arbitrary power, rights earned only by age and rank, women subordinated to men, children subordinated completely to the power of their parents. So many abuses and horrors stem from this kind of unchecked authority. Only recently have governments begun to interfere in this unit to preserve the rights of children, and the economic power of women, still less than that of men, has grown to give them leverage which they did not formerly possess. The queer family, as modeled in The Owl House, is a riposte, a fuck you, to patriarchy. Ida the Owl Lady has a leadership role not because of her age, but because of her experience, and she listens to both Luce and King when they tell her she's wrong. She admits her mistakes, and she doesn't ever use physical violence to compel obedience, the bare fucking minimum, but a bar many families can't reach. With this solid foundation of a queer family underfoot, Luce has the power and agency to engage in an enemies-to-lovers arc with Amity Blight, a mean girl at the magical academy Luce begins to attend irregularly from episode 4. They begin as rivals, then slowly become friends, and finally, beginning in episode 16, Luce begins to fall for Amity, and Amity for Luce, after they dance at Grom Night, a kind of magical prom. In the second season of The Owl House, Luce faces up to the reality that she abandoned her mom and chose to stay on the Boiling Isles by destroying the Owl Door, the portal between the two worlds. Her mom is hurt by this immensely when she finds out. A shape-shifting creature from the Boiling Isles has been impersonating Luce, but when the deception is revealed, Mama Noceda is heartbroken and begs Luce to come back and never go back to the Boiling Isles. After the dramatic finale to Season 2, Luce and her friends, and girlfriend, are blasted back into the human realm and they are welcomed by Luce's mom. One of the most wretched agonies of being a fan of The Owl House is seeing the 3 long episodes of Season 3, which are essentially the skeleton of a solid 2 or 3 more seasons of the show that could have been, if The Owl House wasn't strangled by the Disney Corporation in its metaphorical crib. Episode 1 of Season 3 shows Luce's mom taking in this band of misfits, which is a fairly classic trope of queer culture, especially queer youth culture. Those of us lucky enough to have a supportive family, open to our queerness, our neurodiversity, our general weirdness, often serve as a safe haven for those who don't. Luce's mom has learned her lesson. She no longer wants to fix Luce, She wants to help her. We also see, in a montage, Luce coming out to her mom, which is unforgivable. The fact that this had to be shoved into a montage, not Luce's coming out, which seems to go well. Luce, however, still feels guilty about abandoning her mother and about her role in uniting Emperor Belos with the source of his power, a little star child with enormous power named the Collector. But in Season 3, Episode 2, we get the culmination of Luce's inner journey. Her mom expresses her regret for trying to change her, confessing that she was a nerd when she was young and had a hard time because of it, and she wanted Luce to have it easier. Luce has a profound realization.
The only thing I've ever really wanted was to be understood.
I really like the differentiation here between acceptance and understanding. Luce's mom was already accepting of Luce, and she knew it. But when Luce feels genuinely understood by her mom, it opens the door to a deeper relationship and unlocks power within Luce. This is the best that family can be to one another. Not just accepting, which again is a bare minimum for someone you love, but understanding, extending your love for who that person is in your life to who that person is in their own life. Luce's found family didn't need to work for this. They already know what it's like to be a weirdo, and what it's like to be queer. Ida has a queer relationship with a non-binary character, so they understood right away. Mama Noceda did understand what it's like to be a weirdo from her own nerdy childhood, but she pushed that part of her down in the interest of self-preservation, and suppressed it in her daughter out of a misguided love.
You're a nerd?
I had a hard time growing up. I was afraid you would too. My biggest mistake was trying to protect you by changing this beautiful, good witch into something she wasn't.
She needed to rekindle that understanding to be there for Luce. When Luce's mom and Ida finally meet, they bond over their shared love for Luce, and Luce creates a hybrid family. Her family of birth and the one she chose, showing that having a found family doesn't necessarily mean you're rejecting the family you're born into. If anything, finding family can help you repair and renew the bonds of the family you were born into, so long as your birth family is open to change. In She-Ra, our heroine Adora begins the show as a loyal soldier of the Horde. The Horde is an offshoot of an evil galactic empire trying to conquer the planet of Etheria, though Adora doesn't know this. She's been raised by her surrogate mother, a witch named Shadow Weaver, to believe the Horde is good and the princesses of Etheria are evil terrorists. The Horde is a society which embodies many fascist values. It prizes strength and scorns weakness. Adora mentions in a later episode that when she caught a cold, she would hide, so as not to show physical infirmity to others, and the Horde encourages ruthless competition in its ranks. Only Hordak, the leader, is above this struggle, having deduced the same lesson Hitler and Mussolini did. If you keep your underlings at each other's throats, they'll be too busy to plot against you. Yet the crushing conformity of the Horde didn't succeed in suppressing the spirit of either Adora or her best friend, Catra. Catra, who is also raised by Shadow Weaver, is a rebellious spirit, and convinces Adora to steal a skiff and go out of the Fright Zone, the Horde's heartland. They end up in the Whispering Woods, where Adora finds the Sword of Destiny and becomes She-Ra. She gets separated from Catra and meets Glimmer and Bow, both members of the Rebellion, the indigenous resistance of Etheria against the colonialist Horde. They capture her, then befriend her, and in the next episode Adora sees the Horde for what they really are, violent imperialists and fascist aggressors who think nothing of destroying a civilian town to find her. This is analogous to the tactics of real-world fascists. In Nazi-occupied France, if German soldiers were killed or captured by the French resistance, the occupation regime would commit violent reprisals against civilians. While She-Ra is a kid's show and obviously wouldn't show scenes of horrific violence like that the Nazis inflicted on France, the assault on Thamor by the forces of the Horde is an analogous event, and within the constraints of a show intended for kids, it's brutal, and it proves to be the breaking point for Adora. She refuses to go back with the Horde forces and begs Catra to come with her. But Catra sees Adora's choice to reject the Horde as a choice to reject her, and refuses to come with. One can read Adora's choice to leave the Horde as going no contact with Shadow Weaver, her abusive mother. Shadow Weaver's abuse of Adora was a peculiar kind of abuse. She put Adora on a pedestal while manipulating and physically threatening Catra, her other ward. Adora did her best to protect Catra, but Catra still resented her for being the favorite. This kind of abuse is pernicious because it can take a long time, and in the real world, often lots of therapy, for the child who was put on a pedestal to realize they were a victim too. This treatment breeds resentment in every direction. Adora and Catra's enemies to lovers story is a slow burn, but by season 5, when Adora rescues Catra from the clutches of the biggest bad, Horde Prime, Catra has finally grown up enough to try and repair the damage she did by lashing out at supposed betrayals. And after reopening the door to a friendship with Adora, they grow closer. In the very end, as Horde Prime is trying to kill Adora and take possession of the enormous power at the very heart of Etheria, it is the love between Catra and Adora which saves the world. Catra's queer love for Adora, finally confessed and reciprocated, cleanses Adora of the virus Horde Prime inflicted on her, a virus that was turning her into a weapon to be used against the people she loves. This virus could be interpreted allegorically as many things: internalized queerphobia, internalized misogyny, reactionary hatred from without that gets swallowed up in a vain attempt to ease the pain of it. But the cure to the virus is simple: love without apology and without shame. Queer love is the culmination and victory of the struggle the people of Etheria wage against the evil Horde, because this unbounded love is the ultimate antithesis of the reactionary hatred that exists at the very center of the Horde, the hate which seeks to destroy the whole universe if it cannot be totally controlled. The first books to be burned in Nazi Germany were queer books from the Institute of Sexology. Putin, Orban, Trump, and Erdogan have all used and stoked hatred of queer people, particularly trans people, in order to attain or cement their power. Queer people, particularly those of us who bend or distort the classical categories of male and female, represent a potent challenge to authoritarianism rooted in the idea of the papa di tutti papi, or, to borrow a phrase of Lindsay Ellis's, the daddy of daddies. This is the fundamental idea expressed by Robert Filmer in Patriarcha and the notion which undergirded the absolute monarchies of feudal Europe and imperial China. The idea that Heavenly Father appoints his bestest son to be the father of a nation, and he is to rule over all the other fathers, who then rule over their wives and their children. The whole system of patriarchal authority, which demands unthinking obedience of all the daddies from your daddy all the way up to daddy in heaven, is deeply threatened by queer ideas of family and love, because unthinking obedience is anathema to love rooted in the consensual association of equals. Queer revolutionary love is taking the power to shape oneself and one's relationship with others, and using that power to build structures which benefit all participants within them. Luce integrates her blood family and her new queer family and finds the strength to be unabashedly herself. Adora and Catra's queer love saves their world from destruction. Queer love makes a revolution that starts in the heart and extends through the basic fabric of society, because the first act of queer love is to be unabashedly yourself. And this is why queer love is so threatening to people like Trump and Putin, Orban and Erdogan. They claim to be defenders of the traditional family, of women and children against the queer menace, but what they really want, what their traditional family actually means, is the unfettered power of men over their wives and fathers over their children. It means the authority of a king, masquerading under the democratic title of president, over his children/subjects, an authority as absolute as the power of God over the earth. In both shows, the antagonist seeks to dominate the land on which their victims depend. Horde Prime intends to harness the magic of Etheria, using the planet itself as a dread weapon of war. Likewise, Emperor Belos attempts to hijack the power of the Titan, on whose decaying body the inhabitants of the Boiling Isles live. By seeking to subordinate the natural world to their will, the antagonists become representatives of Dominionism, the idea that the natural place of humanity, and specifically the patriarchs, is to rule over not just other humans, but nature itself. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and every other living thing that moveth upon the earth. Genesis 1:28. For biblical literalists,
morons.
This means God handed the earth to mankind as something to be mastered and tamed. This ideology sets humans apart from nature, which it positions below humanity in the dominance hierarchy, thus granting patriarchs unlimited authority to claim and exploit natural resources for their own ends. This idea came in very handy for Europeans when they began colonizing the rest of the earth starting around 1500 CE, and as colonialism ground on, new variations on the theme cropped up. Manifest destiny, the white man's burden, all justifications for the ruthless and rapacious seizure and despoliation of the lands of other peoples. The ideology remains a potent political force to this day, manifesting in, for example, the unbridled entitlement the wealthy and powerful feel to all the riches of the earth. For all the unspeakable evils of Dominionism, it's important to recognize that it does serve a cultural purpose beyond the justification of greed and exploitation. Nature is fucking terrifying, and it is perfectly understandable that humans would seek to control it. All of civilization is predicated on exerting control over the non-human world. Agriculture, medicine, engineering, and even science as a whole could be framed as ways of subordinating nature to human will. The true evil of Dominionism stems not merely from the notion that nature ought to be controlled, but from how it models the relationship between humanity and nature as one of master and slave. The Dominionism depicted in the Owl House is the more classical of the two representations, with a clear religious angle. To Emperor Belos, the inhabitants of the demon realm are a threat to humanity, undeserving of life, and he harnesses the power of the Titan in an explicit attempt to eradicate that threat. Because Belos is heavily coded as a Puritan, being a witch hunter from New England in the 1600s, it's easy to read his fear and disgust for the admittedly chaotic Boiling Isles as a consequence of it failing to conform to the strictures of his highly orderly, patriarchal worldview. One of the deep problems with Dominionism is that the world is not, in actuality, structured in a clear hierarchy of power with humans above the non-human world. The appearance of such a hierarchy is only ever an artifice made possible by large-scale industrial societies, where our dependence on nature can be, to some extent, concealed through enormous unseen effort. Note that the Bible quote from earlier takes the form of a command: "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it." Dominionism is aspirational. It instructs us to use any means at our disposal to shape our environment to better serve our needs and desires, and in the process conditions us to fear, even despise, that which we cannot control. On the Boiling Isles, wild magic is the ultimate natural resource, and both Belos and Luz use it to attain their ends. However, the way each character does so perfectly encapsulates the difference between their orientations towards the natural world. The Titan is the source of wild magic, and it can be accessed with special glyphs. Luz's attitude towards the Titan and their magic is one of wonder and gratitude, bordering on reverence. She loves the Boiling Isles, while fully knowing how dangerous they can be, and her powers stem from a place of understanding and respect for the demonic. In contrast, Belos views wild magic only as a tool for domination. His lust for ever greater mastery over the Titan's power drives him to carve glyphs into his own flesh, ironically transfiguring himself into the sort of monster he seeks to eradicate. Belos' orientation towards magic is consumptive. He needs to consume palisman, the magical creatures which make up the staffs wielded by witches, in order to keep his power. In order to stay alive back in the human realm, where he follows Luz and the gang after the finale of Season 2, he has to demonically possess animals. In the final act of the story, Belos possesses the body of the Titan themselves, gaining tremendous magical power and nearly destroying the Isles in the process. Originally, Belos came to the Boiling Isles in search of his brother Caleb, who left the human realm to be with a witch named Evelyn. Upon discovering that the two were in love and having a child together, he became so enraged that he murdered his brother. He blamed Evelyn for corrupting Caleb and concocted a plan for revenge. His branded coven sigils would have allowed him to control and ultimately eradicate the witches, if not for the intervention of our protagonists. While the demon realm is home to all sorts of malevolent creatures who could certainly pose a threat to humans if they managed to reach our realm, the Owl House makes it clear that a desire to physically protect humanity is not Belos' primary motivation, merely a justification. To him, the love of a witch is a moral threat more grave than any physical danger, and so any action, even annihilating an entire culture and becoming monstrous himself in the process, is justified if it succeeds at eliminating the temptation of subversive love. In She-Ra, Horde Prime has little use for religion, but aspires to godhood himself through the use of advanced technology. His Dominionism is therefore of a different, less tortured flavor from that of Emperor Belos. Already functionally immortal and seemingly able to surveil his vast empire through the eyes of his soldiers, Prime views the whole universe as his by right of conquest. While Dominionism as an ideology is strongly associated with Christianity, its essential feature, the imposition of a hierarchy of dominance over all of nature, can be divorced from its religious context. Horde Prime's philosophy is, in its essence, Dominionism adapted to a godless universe.
Thank you for your allegiance, child. All creatures, no matter how small, have a place in service of Horde Prime.
One need only replace God with the patriarch himself, and if he's sufficiently powerful, the ideological structure still holds. After all, God's own authority is justified only by reference to his power. Because the source of Prime's authority is technological rather than spiritual, I'll refer to his ideology as techno-dominionism. This ideology is, unfortunately, extremely influential in the world today. The ruling class squanders billions of dollars grasping ineffectually at immortality while denying healthcare to ordinary people, and allows thousands of children to starve to death every day. They use technology to surveil us, gathering data on every aspect of our lives, and disseminate right-wing propaganda to manage dissent. They are more than willing to risk ecological catastrophe for no other purpose than to feed their inexhaustible greed, viewing all the natural resources of the earth as mere commodities to be extracted and repurposed to fuel the fires of economic growth. Techno-dominionism lies at the fetid intersection of Christian dominionism and social Darwinism, two already noxious ideologies made all the more repugnant by their combination. In short, social Darwinism refers to the pseudoscientific application of the principle of survival of the fittest to human individuals and societies. According to social Darwinists, the fittest humans, often the economic elite or a particular racial or ethnic group, and almost invariably the in-group of the social Darwinist themselves, are biologically superior to the rest of humanity and ought to dominate the weak and inferior humans lower down on the social or economic hierarchy. Social Darwinism has been deployed as the secular philosophical justification for eugenics, imperialism, genocide, far-right economic policies, and dominionism. Social Darwinism and so-called scientific racism were used to justify segregation and bans on interracial marriage in the United States, and the racial laws of the state of Virginia became a handy blueprint for the Nazis when they attained power in Germany. Their hatred of Jews, Slavs, and disabled peoples sprang from their own country, but the framework they used to punish those that they called Untermenschen, subhumans, used the good old US of A as a model. Scientifically, social Darwinism is based on a misunderstanding of evolutionary biology. It relies on conflating the concept of evolutionary fitness, a technical term measuring reproductive success, with colloquial definitions of fitness having to do with athleticism, strength of will, economic success, or position within social hierarchies. An asthmatic peasant who has 6 children before dying at a young age of dysentery is more evolutionarily fit than a billionaire Olympian with a single child, because the peasant has achieved greater reproductive success. In human cultures, empathy and social skills are generally more important for reproductive success than the capacity for physical domination. As a species, our physical prowess is meager at best in comparison to our closest relatives, the great apes. The real strength of humanity lies in our capacity for cooperation, development of complex social structures, and transmission of knowledge and tools from one generation to the next. Social Darwinism is quite literally inhuman, but even if it were scientifically sound, which it most assuredly is not, it would still be guilty of committing the naturalistic fallacy. Nature simply being a certain way doesn't have any intrinsic moral implications for humanity. Even if it were true that the social Darwinists' preferred in-group were more evolutionarily fit than other humans, and it's not, that wouldn't morally justify their social or political control over those who are less fit, And so we find ourselves right back at the might makes right mentality at the heart of Dominionism. Like Dominionism, social Darwinism is best understood as an aspiration rather than a coherent model of the world as it is. Techno-Dominionists want to populate the world with subservient copies of themselves, whether genetically or ideologically, and depopulate it of all those they view as inferior. This impulse is depicted brilliantly in Horde Prime's army of interchangeable clones, whose minds are transparent to him and whose bodies he possesses at will. This same impulse is one of the many factors driving billionaires to invest in artificial intelligence, which represents for them a vast reservoir of ideological clay to mold in their own image, endless replicas of ideal subjects for indoctrination to whose minds they have direct access. Horde Prime colonizes Etheria in an attempt to harness its immense magical power, needing no justification beyond his ability to do so. Whereas religious dominionism is at least in principle still constrained by the moral commands of God, techno-dominionism places no restrictions whatsoever on the behavior of the patriarch, and so it becomes a totalizing amoral ideology. Taken to its logical extreme, every aspect of reality is viewed through the lens of how it can be warped to serve the patriarch. No cruelty is too great, no lie too outrageous, and no hypocrisy too brazen. Perhaps the most terrifying part about Dominionism is that, despite its flimsy philosophical and scientific underpinnings, it nonetheless has a chance of succeeding in its ends. Belos rules the Boiling Isles for half a century, Horde Prime's empire extends across vast stretches of space and time, and in the real world, Dominionism is arguably the dominant ideology at this moment in history, with its proponents hoarding immense wealth and controlling the most powerful military in the world. While abandoning any sincere religiosity unshackles techno-dominionists from God's restrictive moral commandments, it also removes any reason whatsoever for them to trust one another, even when their interests are largely aligned. Genuine Christian dominionists still bicker over who gets to be the biggest, baddest patriarch, but they are ultimately acting in service of the same God, who acts as a binding but conveniently absent leader. Fascist leaders are, and historically were, constantly at each other's throats because they are ideologically committed to being duplicitous, backstabbing bastards, ultimately only looking out for themselves. Despite Ernst Röhm and the SA being instrumental to the Nazi seizure of power in 1933, Hitler had no bones about decimating them during the Night of the Long Knives when they seemed a threat to his power. During the war, the Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, hated Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, who hated him back. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, feared his deputy Reinhard Heydrich, and the SS tried to take over the functions of the Wehrmacht, the German army. The head of the German Air Force, Hermann Göring, hated the foreign minister, Ribbentrop, and made catty comments about him to Hitler. When I questioned Ribbentrop's ability to cope with British problems, Göring later commented, Hitler explained to me that Ribbentrop knew Lord so-and-so. I replied, yes, but the trouble is, they also know Ribbentrop. And by the end of the war, Göring and Himmler were both trying to make peace with the Western allies behind Hitler's back. It's difficult to cooperate with people who you know would turn on you the moment you're no longer useful. For us peasants, it's easy to think of the economic elites as a well-organized cabal, but the reality is that they are in constant competition with each other. They can give the appearance of a united front in their opposition to policies which directly threaten their shared economic interests, like tax increases and labor rights, but by and large, they don't trust each other enough to actually share power. Horde Prime's totalitarianism must be extreme because social control, constant surveillance, and endless expansionism are all necessary in order to avoid the peril of organized dissent. Coalition is the eternal scourge of dominionist patriarchs because, to quote Thomas Hobbes,
Nature hath made men so equal in the faculties of body and mind, as that, though there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or of quicker mind than another, yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable as that one man can thereupon claim to himself any benefit to which another may not pretend as well as he. For as to the strength of the body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself.
Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan. Hobbes is saying here that even though some individuals are stronger or smarter than others, no single person is mighty or clever enough to stand alone against a united coalition. And while the quote is about individuals, the sentiment tends to hold on just about any scale of analysis, from petty workplace power struggles to global geopolitics. According to Hobbes, this places each of us in a state of intolerable insecurity, knowing that no matter how much power we manage to accumulate for ourselves, we'll always remain vulnerable to each other. For him, the only viable solution to this predicament is for everyone to simultaneously surrender some of their natural rights to a state in an agreement called the social contract, thereby consenting to be governed and safeguarding the rest of their rights. Social contract theory is a framework for understanding the relationship between a sovereign, whether an individual ruler or some form of council or assembly, and its subjects. And in contrast to the supposed absolute power of the patriarch over his children, the sovereign must abide by the terms of the social contract in order to preserve its power. Social contract theory developed in part as an Enlightenment critique of patriarchy, though not a feminist one. In 1680, John Locke, one of the quintessential Enlightenment philosophers, wrote 2 treatises on government in response to Patriarcha by Sir Robert Filmer, rejecting the notion of God-given absolute authority vested in a hereditary monarch, instead asserting that the right to rule derives from the consent of the governed, and that if the people were greatly oppressed by their rulers, the people had a right to revolt against them. In summary, techno-dominionism necessitates extreme measures of socio-political repression because the patriarch heeds the social contract only when it's convenient to do so, giving his subjects no reason to voluntarily consent to his governance. And there is no breach of the social contract more extreme than the wanton despoliation of the very land on which the people depend. Setting aside the social contract theoretic critiques, a fundamental flaw with Dominionism as an ideology is that it fails to account for the interconnectedness and interdependence inherent to life as we know it. Before the patriarch can place himself above nature in the grand hierarchy of creation, he must first set himself apart from nature. Despite hating the demon realm with a burning passion, Emperor Belus is dependent on its magic to survive, requiring a constant supply of palisman to compensate for the damage caused by the glyphs he carved into his skin. He lives in the Boiling Isles for centuries, yet apparently feels not even the slightest bit of attachment to the land which sustains him. His ultimate doom is decided when the Titan lends loose the last of their magic, granting to her the sort of extraordinary power that he failed to usurp by force. This communicates that the greatest gifts of nature are not the ones which can be extracted by brute force, but rather those which it yields freely when met with proper understanding and respect. As the ruler of a vast galactic empire, Horde Prime is not dependent on Etheria, but his downfall still results from his failure to understand it as a complex system. Prime sees Etheria only as the weapon the first ones crafted it into, but that's not the planet's deepest nature. The planet is a kind of magical superorganism, finely balanced to produce beauty and life in rich abundance. Ultimately, the love Adora and Catra have for one another allows them to channel the power of Etheria more effectively than either the First Ones or Horde Prime could manage through their respective colonial projects. Once again, this communicates that even from a purely pragmatic perspective, Dominionism is not the optimal method of inducing nature to meet our needs. As economically or geopolitically useful as reckless extraction might seem in the short term, societies which insist on taxing nature beyond its ability to replenish itself, overwhelming the homeostatic mechanisms responsible for maintaining the careful balance that we evolved to thrive in, are doomed to fail. Through their vainglorious efforts to set themselves above nature, Dominionists manage only to transfigure themselves into a kind of cancer. Just as cancer cells ignore signals to stop dividing, endlessly replicating beyond the capacity of the body to sustain them, so too do the patriarchs ignore the grave warnings issued by scientists about the likely consequences of their project of perpetual industrial growth. One way or another, they must be stopped, and just as the foundation of patriarchy is shattered by queer love, the foundation of Dominionism is shattered by ecological love. Luce and Adora both meet the threat of Dominionism by building broad-based pro-social and environmentalist coalitions, forged through friendship. Both Luce and Adora perceive themselves as guardians of their adopted homes, and show great humility in that role. Adora as She-Ra has a messianic tinge, but her full power only comes when she realizes that She-Ra is not the administrator of Etheria, but its foremost servant. Luce loves the Boiling Isles because her friends are so deeply of the place. As eventually revealed, cute little King is a baby Titan, and in fact, the son of the dead Titan whose body makes up the Isles themselves. So for Luce, having been adopted into the queer family made by Ida the Owl Lady, the Boiling Isles themselves have become a relative, and in that light she views them much like many indigenous peoples view our Earth, as mother and father. King's dad is canonically gender fluid. Even many Christians find that within their faith a moral imperative to act as Earth shepherds, respecting and cherishing the splendor of nature which God has entrusted into our care. An ecological strain of Christianity has coexisted and competed with the Dominionist school for 1,000 years at least, as St. Francis of Assisi spoke about the earth in the Canticle of Creatures. Praised be you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains us and directs us, bringing forth all kinds of fruits and colored flowers and herbs. Francis of Assisi's attitude towards creation was one of deep humility and appreciation. Like Luce and Adora, Francis saw the power he had, such that it was, as a tool to use for the good of our planet, not to dominate it. For a more recent example, his later namesake Pope Francis I wrote, "Although it is true that we Christians have at times incorrectly interpreted the scriptures, nowadays we must forcefully reject the notion that our being, created in God's image and given dominion over the earth, justifies absolute domination over other creatures. Each community can take from the bounty of the earth whatever it needs for subsistence, but it also has the duty to protect the earth and to ensure its fruitfulness for coming generations." The principle of reciprocity, of giving back as much as you take, is antithetical to the current model of extractive capitalism which is killing our planet. The ultimate cure to the pride and greed of Dominionism is humility and contentment. As the second chapter of the Tao Te Ching reads, "Do not glorify the achievers, so the people will not squabble. Do not treasure goods that are hard to obtain, so the people will not become thieves. Do not show the desired things, so their hearts will not be confused. Thus the governance of the sage empties their hearts, fills their bellies, weakens their ambitions, strengthens their bones. Let the people have no cunning and no greed, so those who scheme will not dare to meddle, act without contrivance, and nothing will be beyond control." Do not glorify the achievers is an almost breathtaking statement in a society which is built around attainment and wealth. But what wisdom is there? Luce and Adora both achieve, yet they do not do so for glory but for the good of others. They don't seek fame, just acceptance and love. They love their girlfriends and their queer families and the very world, but having found that love, they are content. Both shows end with scenes of community finally free of the threat posed by the rapacious greed and reactionary hate of Emperor Belos and Horde Prime. That is a lesson our society dearly needs to learn. Misery proliferates amidst bounty because consumer capitalism demands of us a perpetual hunger for more. More stuff, more food, more status, more beauty. The most effective sales tactic is not presenting a product that may be useful. It is convincing people that without this product, you are less than. Without this laundry soap, you will be dirtier. Without this makeup, you will be uglier. Insecurity gives rise to greed, and greed, unfettered by reasonable laws or social pressure, leads to the destruction of the earth, our island home. Revolutionary love involves a radical humility, to know when enough is enough, to seek contentment rather than advancement. Human progress must be founded on a rejection of the consumer ideal, on recognizing that greed must be curbed and insecurity assuaged. Material goods can bring happiness to a point, and that point is when one knows they will not be hungry, that if they are sick they can receive care, that they can be assured of a roof over their head, and that they have the freedom to enrich their experience of the world through their hobbies and art. Beyond that, accumulation of wealth brings no real joy. It's just a way of running up the score. The billionaires and soon-to-be trillionaires who are ravaging this beautiful world of ours do so with the delusion that they will be spared the agonies of a world on fire. In this, they fall victim to the same delusions as Prime and Bellows, but with substantially flimsier justifications. Unlike those patriarchs, billionaires don't have another world to fall back on. The Mars colony obsession of the late 2010s and early 2020s is very much in this vein. Don't worry, we can use up Earth. The rich have somewhere else to go. The bunkers the ultra-rich build, like the vaults in the video game series Fallout, give them a false sense of security and further encourage reckless disregard for the well-being of the planet. A Mars colony without Earth would eke out a miserable existence on a cold, dry world with a poisonous atmosphere, populated solely by some of the most greedy and selfish human beings to ever exist. It would collapse in internal conflict more quickly than the City of Rapture from BioShock. No living thing on this earth is totally apart from the biosphere. We are all one sounds to many Westerners like some hippie woo-woo nonsense, but it gets at a very critical truth. Humans are not above or apart from nature. We are flesh and blood, prone to disease, dependent on food and water, subject to instinctual drives. We are the most drastic reshapers of the earth, but ultimately we are organisms, and organisms that have initiated the sixth great mass extinction in the history of life by our rapaciousness, our needs, and our greed. Our attempts to dominate nature have already begun to backfire. Our overuse of antibiotics is creating a host of diseases we can no longer effectively treat. Antibiotic-resistant superbugs that could devastate humankind. Our encroachment on the wilds has led to zoonotic diseases like AIDS, Ebola, and COVID, and worse ailments could be lurking out there, ready to be revealed by a chance encounter between a logger and a chimpanzee. Nature is fucking terrifying, but far more terrifying is the result of ecological collapse. Our oceans becoming dead zones and oxygen levels dropping to the point where even at sea level, one would fight to breathe, and the higher altitudes would become uninhabitable. A world where deserts expand and swallow up formerly fertile lands, where the forests retreat towards the poles and the equatorial regions bake in temperatures of 50 or 60 degrees Celsius. The wars that would follow from that, as desperate nations fight for the remaining habitable scraps of land, as millions die trying to find places life is still livable, could spell the very end of human civilization. We have no She-Ra to wield magic power and defeat the Dominionists who will ravage Earth until her ability to support our species is dramatically curtailed or eliminated. Yet we do have the same capacity which unlocks the most potent magic for both Adora and Luce. We have love. Love for one another, love for the world, love which will not bow down to hate and greed, but motivates us instead to fight for it. Love that can give guidance to the energies of anger and fear, that can help us tear down this structure and build a new one. On 19th August of 1944, the French resistance launched a coordinated rebellion against the German occupiers in Paris, as the American Third Army and the Free French Army approached from the north and west. Hitler gave the order that Paris was to be destroyed rather than handed over to the Allies, that the remaining treasures of the Louvre be burned, Notre Dame and Sacré-Cœur blown up, and the city itself burned to the ground. The German commander, perhaps with an eye towards post-war punishments, failed to carry out the orders. The resistance occupied the Hôtel de Ville, the Louvre, and other important points throughout the city. Soon the army of Free France, led by Charles de Gaulle, entered the City of Light, which for 4 long years had suffered beneath the German boot. By the end of the year, the Germans were driven out of France, and in May 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allies. The swastika came down from the Eiffel Tower, and raised once more was the tricolore of France, the motto of the fascist puppet State of France. Travail, famille, patrie, work, family, fatherland, was effaced, and once more liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, brotherhood, reigned in France. 390,000 French civilians had been killed during the war. 75,000 of those were Jews like Madeleine Lebeau, who were herded into the infamous cattle cars which bore them to Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka. On its own, without any pressure whatsoever from the Nazis, alone among all occupied Western European nations, France's Vichy government wrote its own anti-Semitic policies, extended the definition of Jews beyond contemporary Nazi practice, imposed a quota system to limit the number of Jews in certain spheres of life, and interned foreign Jews in camps throughout the country. Its legal system cooperated with Nazi goals to a greater extent than any other occupied nation. In addition, not only did 3,000 foreign Jews die in French-run internment camps, but it was Pierre Laval, second in command under Marshal Pétain, who, when the Nazis required that Jewish males aged 16 to 60 and females aged 16 to 55 be deported, further requested that Jewish children also be deported along with their parents. Yet in France, with a Jewish population of 330,000 before the war, the greatest proportion of Jews in any occupied nation survived. Jewish children were adopted into French families to keep them safe. The French resistance and aid workers helped Jews escape into Switzerland and Spain. In Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, a small town in southern France, Pastor André Trocmé, his wife Magda, and his cousin Daniel spearheaded a rescue effort of Jews from all over France, rescuing more than 5,000 of them between 1942 and 1945. The Vichy authorities suspected the Trocmés family's activities and demanded that André supply a list of Jews in Le Chambon, to which he replied, "These people came here for help and for shelter. I am their shepherd. A shepherd does not forsake his flock. I do not know what a Jew is. I only know human beings." A few weeks later, the Gestapo came for 18 Jewish students hiding in a safe house run by André's cousin, Daniel. The students woke up at 6:30 to find the house surrounded by approximately 15 machine gun and revolver-wielding members of the Gestapo. The students were rounded up into the kitchen and interrogated individually in the director's office. There was no chance of escape into the woods. Around 7:30, the Gestapo was told that the director, Daniel Trocmé, spent the night in Les Crayons, the other house he directed. Some of the soldiers went to Les Crayons, arrested Daniel, and brought him to La Maison de Roche. The students at Les Crayons warned Daniel that the Gestapo was there to arrest him and urged him to hide in the woods. He stood his ground and said, "I cannot run. I am responsible for La Maison de Roche." The last words Daniel spoke to any member of his family were spoken as he left La Maison de Roche the day of the raid. Words addressed to Magda and recorded in English many years later in her interview in The Courage to Care. "Do not worry. Tell my parents that I was very happy here. It was the best time of my life. Tell them that I like traveling, that I go with my friends." Daniel Trocmé was murdered in the gas chamber of Majdanek concentration camp in April of 1944. 7 of the students survived the camps, 5 were gassed, and 6 more remain unaccounted for, like so many victims of the Gestapo and the SS. André and Magda were imprisoned by the Vichy authorities in 1943, yet despite their absence, their congregation in La Chambon continued hiding and helping Jews and other refugees. Like Sousa Mendes, they saw their Christianity as a commandment to love. André and Magda survived the war. Madeleine Lebeau returned to France in 1945 and continued acting, living a long and by all accounts happy life. She died in 2016, still remembered for her appearance in Casablanca. The beauty of her performance, made possible by the actions of Sousa Mendes, still lives on and can still inspire others to stand up for liberty. On 7th January 2026, Renee Nicole Good was shot by an ICE agent after she tried to drive away from another agent who had pulled a gun on her. Her crime was filming ICE's brutal operations against the people of Minneapolis. Secretary of Homeland Security Kirsty Noem and the right wing have tried to characterize her as a domestic terrorist who tried to run over the agent, but the video plainly shows she was turning away from them and was shot in the head trying to flee. She broke no laws. She did nothing wrong, and she was murdered by the secret police. Filming ICE, holding them accountable for their brutality, got her killed. The act of witnessing, punishable by death. Jaylani Hussein, who spoke at her vigil, said, "She died because she loved her neighbors." The 2 animated shows I've talked about wisely do not delve into the darkest recesses of human reality. Though their villains are genuinely stomach-wrenching and even terrifying, they are not half as brutal as the Gestapo Reborn, which is currently rounding up desperate refugees and sending them to concentration camps and prisons around the globe. But they are a good way to teach the young the moral virtue of revolutionary love. Love which conquers fear and hate, because it does not know what a Venezuelan or Somali is, love that knows only human beings. In an age of darkness, of encroaching fascism, these two shows can give a little lift to the heart. For those of us at the outskirts of society, be we queer or trans or foreign or neurodiverse, that simple little reminder, us weirdos have to stick together, is powerful, and a lesson we need to learn. We have to love one another. That's the easy lesson. The harder lesson to learn is that we have to be open to loving those who persecute us. I see a lot of posts on Blue Sky calling for the execution of every ICE agent when this regime is out of power, and I understand the impulse, the reaction to these thugs kidnapping and murdering innocent people with impunity. I want the ICE agent who murdered Renee Good to go to prison for the rest of his life, but I don't want him to die. I want him to feel the enormity of the crime he's committed, to regret every day that he killed a poet, a wife, and a mother of 3 young children, who did nothing except film the crimes before her and try to get away from a man pointing a gun at her. If there is any shred of humanity left in the people who serve this criminal regime, I want to find it. I want them to seek the forgiveness of those they've harmed. Whether their victims choose to forgive is entirely their affair. Most of all, I want the millions of people who voted for this lunatic and his gang of criminal incompetents to change their hearts. The vast majority of Trump voters would describe themselves as Christians. All I want is for the Dominionists to remember the parable from the Gospel of Matthew. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it for me. In a Christian nation worthy of the name, refugees would be welcome. No one would suffer malnutrition nor the indignity of houselessness. The sick would not be denied treatment, and prisoners would not be subjected routinely to torture. We would live with gratitude for the world which sustains us, acting as far-sighted shepherds of nature rather than its despoilers. And everyone, rich and poor, conservative, socialist, and liberal alike, would live a life more secure in their liberty than they can today. So what is to be done? Go forth in the name of love. Be good to those in your life. Be patient with those who try your patience. Be kind to those who are unkind. Above all, show your love for those less fortunate than you. Use whatever privilege you may possess to advocate for others. Build community. Join protests. Get politically involved at whatever level you can sustainably do so. I cannot tell you to be like Susa Mendes or Daniel Trocmé, to give up your career or your very life for the sake of those who are suffering. But whatever capacity you have to do the right thing at this critical moment in history, use it. However you can show love for the oppressed, do. Protest, donate, show up to engage in what is still, as of this recording, a democracy. Be ready to vote, and God forbid, be ready to fight. If nothing else, sing.
Allons enfants de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans les campagnes mugir ces féroces soldats? Ils viennent jusque dans vos bras, égorger aussi ces beaux campagnes. Aux armes citoyennes, formez vos bataillons. Marchons, marchons.
Thank you all so much for watching. This video was a labor of love, and while I think I've learned a lot since my first video, I still have a lot more to learn. I want to thank all 34 of my subscribers very much for being the vanguard in what I hope will one day be a much larger company. And I'd like to thank everyone who watched, liked, and commented on my Fallout video. Your kind words gave me the impetus to keep going, and God willing, this is the second of many more videos to come on this channel. If you like what I do and you're willing to support me, please subscribe, like, comment, share, and also please check out my Patreon. I don't expect YouTube will ever monetize me due to the subject matter I cover, and I intend to keep covering, so your support would be very meaningful. Thank you.